But I want to hit some news that broke last week, and it started with a headline and a quote from Fernando Alonso that said, "I am here to stay." So he has signed a new deal with Aston Martin, tying him to the team through the 2026 season, which we know is when new regulations come into play. I'm just curious. You have a great article on ESPN.com right now about Alonso's decision. You know, when Lewis Hamilton made his choice to switch from Mercedes to Ferrari the following season, I think it said a lot about what Lewis Hamilton believed Ferrari was putting together for the future, right? That he had a lot of confidence in where they were heading. I was curious to see what Fernando Alonso would do because you wondered how optimistic, how confident he is in this team at this point in time. I would say that he feels pretty confident with the regulation changes as well in 2026 with where this team is heading if he's willing to sign a contract extension like this.
Absolutely. I think he thinks he can, if not win a championship here, definitely go back to being a victory contender with Aston Martin. And there's two sides to this. One of them, which you always have to kind of get out of the way with Fernando Alonso, is that his options were limited just because, one of the things that makes him such a compelling character is that he's been to a lot of other teams, he's burnt a lot of bridges, he's upset a lot of former teams in the past. There's some teams that just won't go near him. But at the same time, he's 43 right now. And
Mhm.
it's pretty unprecedented territory in modern Formula One for someone to be that old, and to keep racing. And I think that Aston Martin is just the perfect storm. They need a big name driver. They're in a similar situation. There's not, Lewis has gone to Ferrari, like you mentioned. Max, as far as we understand, is tied down till 2028. I'm surprised Aston haven't kind of gone all in to try and get Max, given Lawrence Stroll's ambitions. But if you're not able to get Max and you're not able to get Lewis, the next best obvious choice is to get Fernando Alonso. And I think that mutually, this this extension makes a lot of sense. Aston Martin, they're investing a huge amount in their facility, in their personnel, etc. They want to win a championship. 2026, they have the Honda engine coming in, which has obviously been winning championships with Red Bull. No point doing all of that if you don't have a driver who can win you those races, win you those championships.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a huge statement of intent from Fernando Alonso. And to be honest with you, it's similar from Aston Martin because they could have been like, well, let's go with Carlos Sainz. Let's give him a deal. Let's maybe try and get Max Verstappen out of that contract. But no, it didn't seem, we never really heard Aston were linked to many other drivers. It seemed like they were like, if Fernando Alonso wants to keep racing, Lawrence Stroll, it seemed to be his opinion that if he wants to keep racing, he's got a contract here. So yeah, I think it's a huge statement of intent from him, but also from the team as well. So really fascinating to see how that plays out. Because can you imagine if he wins a championship age 45? What a story that would
No,
be.
it'd be
I mean,
unbelievable.
I can't I can't imagine it either, but imagine might be the key word. But I mean, Aston certainly want to be in that position, right? They want to be providing Fernando Alonso with a car that can at least challenge for a championship.
Right.
Not
And
next year, but in 2026.
obviously, you mentioned some of his past decisions. Like he's a shrewd businessman.
Yeah.
Like he's going to do what's in the best interest of him, especially because, as you mentioned, his age, the clock is ticking, right? If you're going to win one again, there has to be some urgency here. And he doesn't make this decision lightly, right? And I don't think he makes the decision purely based on the money, either the investment. So
Mm.
he has to be confident and feel and believe in this team and Lawrence Stroll, that he can get it done. Because I feel like when the rumors started swirling that he would potentially leave to join the likes of Red Bull or Mercedes once Lewis leaves, like those actually, I think, made a lot of sense. And you'd wondered if those teams were going to try to jump at the chance because his clock is expiring. But massive news that he's going to
Yeah.
stay with Aston Martin and says a lot about the team and where they're heading. I'm glad you mentioned Carlos Sainz because now the question is, well, what does this mean for him and the rest of the driver market that Alonso is now set in stone with Aston?
Yeah, for Sainz, I think it's pretty wide open. And honestly, I feel so sorry for Carlos Sainz because given the way he's been driving, not just this season, but let's face it, for, at least a year and a half now, he's probably been the more consistent of those two Ferrari drivers, even stretching back to this time last year, certainly over the last 6 months. And yet, the options that he has left really don't look that appealing. I thought Aston was a really strong choice. I spoke to people
Mhm.
close to Carlos and to Carlos himself in Japan, and Aston was one of the names. They were like, yeah, we think that there's a chance there if Fernando doesn't decide to stay. Obviously, that is now out.
Mhm.
Red Bull, I think as long as Max Verstappen is there, it's just such a risky choice. I also don't see them moving away from Sergio Perez. I think that Perez is a safe option for them. They're not expecting him to win a championship, and I think Perez is now in that mindset where he thinks, I don't need to win a championship. I've just got to be quick and
Mhm.
be a good wingman to Max,
Compliment.
ultimately.
Hmm.
And I think that works both ways. Again, I said about mutually beneficial for Aston and Alonso. I think that deal is kind of mutually beneficial for Red Bull and Perez because he knows he's never going to drive a car as good as that again. He's at a stage of his career where he doesn't need to really push for that. I don't think Sainz is going to go in there and accept the same thing. So I think that the only benefit for Sainz going there, and this is something I'm going to tease, and maybe this will come back to, to benefit me in a year or two. There is a rumor in the paddock, or there is still a chatter in the paddock that Max Verstappen might still look to get out of his contract in 2026. So at the beginning of that regulation change, if he believes Red Bull's engine, because I mentioned earlier, Honda's going off to Aston, Red Bull are doing their own engine for that point. If he believes the chatter that the engine is not as good, if you're Carlos Sainz, that is the one moment that you do want to sign a contract now with Red Bull, because let's say you sign a 3-year deal, Max leaves after year one. Doesn't matter if Max obliterated you in year one. You're like, well, I've been
Sure.
here a year. I know the team, etc., etc. So that is in the back of his mind, I'm sure.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.